The preeminent metal band of the early to mid-90s, Pantera put to rest any and all remnants of the 80s metal scene, almost single-handedly demolishing any notion that hair metal, speed metal, power metal, et al. Were anything but passé. Loath to admit it, the Texas band had in fact been one of those 80s metal bands, releasing fairly unsuccessful glam-inspired music throughout much of the decade. The about-face came with the addition of vocalist Phil Anselmo, and the key turning point was the band's major label debut Cowboys from Hell in 1990. Pantera's mainstream breakthrough came next with Vulgar Display of Power in 1992, their second major label album, which thrust the band to the forefront of the metal scene, alongside such veteran bands as Metallica, Megadeth, Slayer and Anthrax, as well as fellow up-and-comers Sepultura and White Zombie. By the time Pantera unleashed Far Beyond Driven in 1994, after 2 long years of touring, they were the most popular metal band in the land. The new album debuted atop the Billboard Top 200 as its lead single I'm Broken was getting massive airplay. At the height of their popularity and influence, Pantera began to self-destruct. Less than 2 months after the release of the Great Southern Trendkill in 1996, an album ridden with allusions to drug abuse and personal destruction, Anselmo overdosed on heroin after a homecoming concert in Texas, and as tensions rose between him and his fellow band members, he began engaging with a growing list of side projects that kept him away from Pantera. A live album, Official Live 101 Proof in 1997, was compiled for release when it became evident that no new studio album was forthcoming anytime soon. One final studio album did result, Reinventing the Steel 2000, but that was more or less it for the briefly reunited Pantera. The band members once again went their separate ways, forming such bands as Damageplan, Down, and Superjoint Ritual. The end of Pantera then became official on December 8, 2004, when guitarist Dimebag Darrell was murdered on stage by a deranged fan. This much-publicized murder shone the spotlight back on Pantera for an extended moment, and amid all of the emotional outpouring and tributes, a consensus arose in retrospect. There was no greater metal band during the early to mid-90s than Pantera, who inspired a legion of rabid fans and whose oft-termed groove metal style bucked all prevailing trends of the day, from hair metal and grunge to nu metal and rap metal, and remains singular to this day, as defined by the vocals of Anselmo as it is by the guitar of Dimebag. But besides that, there are some interesting facts about the Pantera band. Phil Anselmo was molested as a child. Phil Anselmo does not speak of his childhood often, but when he does, the stories are dark stories no kid should have to go through. He grew up in New Orleans, raised in the French Quarter by his mother and aunt. His father lived nearby, too, and ran a restaurant in town for years. It was the time of the Vietnam War, a conflict that caused rifts between generations and often had the world holding its breath over what would happen next. Anselmo's aunt's boyfriend served in the war, and when he came home, the war came home with him. I lived with Vietnam in my house, Anselmo told Revolver. I have vivid memories of my childhood. And one of those memories is waking up to night terrors, this grown man screaming in his sleep from dreams of war. Anselmo also felt the pain of abuse. In an interview with Rolling Stone, he railed against a culture of victimhood and, in a startling and unexpected admission, told the magazine Guess Who was molested his entire child fucking hood by numerous people, both men and women. Me. Anselmo gave no other detail, except to say he had never told the world before that moment, but it happened. Alcohol fueled the band. Pantera were infamous for their hard partying ways, particularly on tour. One of the band's crew, Aaron Wires Barnes, told VH1, "They were the only band I've ever known that if you didn't drink, you'd get fired." Pantera's tour writer and artists' contractual demands for items like food and drink at venues is a virtual liquor store. Backstage, the band demanded liters of whiskey, vodka, and bourbon, plus several cases of beer and several bottles of wine. The band's production office required liters of booze and a bottle of French wine. On stage, they demanded 2 cases of beer and 2 liters of whiskey. These were nightly requirements for tours that could run 80 or more nights. Some of the mayhem caused by such copious consumption of alcohol was caught on film. Mostly, though, it is the stuff of legend, handed down in stories told by the people who were there and shouldn't be able to remember anything, but do. Alcohol continues to be a part of Phil Anselmo's life, as are the offensive and embarrassing things he occasionally does while under the influence, like ranting about white power from the stage at a tribute to Dimebag Darrell. Toxic talk between Vinnie and Phil. Dimebag Darrell's family, including his brother Vinnie Paul, made it known to Phil Anselmo that he was not welcome at Dime's memorial. They were aware of the interview in which Anselmo had said Dime deserved to be beaten severely and were not inclined to be around the singer at that moment, a moment that extended for years. In that time, occasional talk of a Pantera reunion would surface, with Ozzy Osbourne and Black Label Society guitarist Zakk Wylde filling in. Anselmo told journalist Matt Pinfield that he would get in the best shape possible for such a reunion. Wylde indicated he would be up for it as well. Vinnie Paul Abbott would not approve of such a reunion, nor of speaking with Anselmo at all. The two never spoke in person after Pantera's final show, preferring to fire shots at one another in the press. He's done a lot of things that tarnish the image of what Pantera was back then and what it stood for and what it was all about, Abbott told a Brazilian news outlet. Anselmo responded by telling Rolling Stone, "Anything out of that dude's mouth seems sour. You have to worry about Vinnie Paul's state of mind." Dime's girlfriend Rita Haney had spoken of her hope for some reconciliation between the two, if only to honor Dime, but it was not to be.